This is Jen, and welcome to the ARC podcast. My co-host Lindsay isn't here today, so she's doing what I know all so well, helping a child to get to school who does not want to go to school. And we all know that I have a lot of experience with that, so I feel for her and miss her. So Lindsay will be back next time, but I'm excited today because I've got a great uh, person here. I don't know, there's so many words I could just describe her with, basically like a woman of endless talent. But I'm going to go ahead and just give you the bio because I think it's a beautiful bio. Amanda Tipkemper is an independent consultant with 20 years of experience in special education best practices, program design, nonprofit management, and strategic development. Known for her compassionate approach, which I love that, passionate and compassion approach, and innovative solutions, Amanda has dedicated her career to empowering individuals and organizations to reach their full potential. Amanda was most recently the superintendent of schools, vice president of education at Best Point Education and Behavioral Health, where she oversaw the education programs for preschool through transition age students with behavioral health and/or developmental diagnoses ranging from autism to post-traumatic stress disorder. Amanda Tipkemper, thank you for being on the ARC podcast.
Thanks for having me, Jen. I'm excited to be here.
Yes, I'm excited too because I think I've known you since the beginning of my journey. You have been in this biz for like forever. For me, someone that I've always keep in my Rolodex. And I think I've told people to call you in so many ways. And when you were working at Best Point, I was like, man, I really hope she has time for this person. I'm going to send this person over. And I know there's just a lot of people who really revere your skill and are excited about your new business that you're coming up with. So please first tell me about yourself and how you came into this whole disability realm and kind of nonprofit and your new business.
Oh my goodness, that's a really long story. We'll take up the whole amount of time. So I actually did not start out in education. I started out in architecture and made it about halfway. Knew very, very soon that this was not the field for me, but it took me that long to get my parents to agree and understand. So we'll touch upon that again when we go back to consent, right? And sexuality education and how consent is not just about sex. But anyway,
That's
took
right.
me a long time to figure that out. My parents are both educators. My so that really, 20 years later explains a lot
Mhm.
about what I do and why I'm doing it. And then I just kind of fell into the field. I was looking for part-time work to be an in-home therapist with families and had done a couple of interviews, was trying to match up schedules, and my mom let me know about a place called Cincinnati Center for Autism, where I started my career. I hounded them until they offered me an interview, and then, a year later, I was the executive director of Cincinnati Center for Autism, and the rest is kind of history. Now, I didn't sign up for nonprofit management. I had no goals of being a principal or an education administrator. It was a means to the end to do what I love doing, which is addressing service gaps. So there are a lot of services that kids with special needs need, and there were just not a lot of options 20 plus years ago. So I've been blessed to be a part of designing a lot of fantastic options. And then when I moved from Cincinnati Center for Autism to the Children's Home, which is now Best Point, that's when I really delved into sex education, and that's where that began forming when I started working with adolescents on the
Yeah.
spectrum and with related diagnoses.
Yeah. What my best experiences with you were when you were leading our adult support group at the Autism Society, now Autism Connections.
Mhm.
And you have such a great rapport with everyone. Like I could talk to you all day, but especially um, adults with autism.
Oh my
In
goodness.
my opinion, I think that there's just some people who just see the person and can relate and can just feel at home talking to people with autism more than others, and kind of like love it, like love the whole diagnosis, love the people, love the families. And I just saw that being like your power, superpower. And so,
Thanks.
yeah, I think it's important too. I think like the gaps like you're talking about are in the adult world. We spend a
Hmm.
lot of time in autism and the early intervention, but I'm always like, oh, like you're once you're autistic, like once you're diagnosed, you're never going to lose that diagnosis. And so this should be birth to end of life, you know? And so I think what you're doing and working with adolescents and then in adults especially is really important. So can you talk to us about sex education and what your venture is about? Because I really want to dive into it and be able to tell the parents that are listening and the family members and people with developmental disabilities how they can learn more about this with you and delve into this subject in such an easy way that you make it look easy, but it's really hard, Amanda. Not gonna lie about it. This is a really tough subject for me to talk about, and you'll hear
Well,
that as I talk, and my face will probably get red.
my face still gets red, and I like it's something that I've worked on, but like my face just decides to be embarrassed on my behalf, even though my brain is like, this is fine. So
Yeah.
it's, to add on to what I was saying before. So you'd asked why, I became an independent consultant and what kind of pushed me in that direction. And one of the things that pushed me in that direction was a lack of sex education and health education options out there. And not just for kids with special needs, just in general, right?
Yes.
But I know that kids who have a diagnosis or kids who have more unique learning needs are going to require this in a very different way than you'll get in public school. I mean, we're still advocating for kids to be provided with a free and appropriate public education that's not specific to sex education, much less than
Right.
taking that content, right? So, um, I started talking about the importance of sex education 12 years ago with a good ally of mine, Dr. TJ Nastidi. And um, really only one maybe option came up in the one new option, one additional option in the last 12 years came up, and that was Project Care Star through Planned Parenthood and the YWCA. And that's not enough. And that is one option out there that will probably meet the needs of one type of, learner. So again, I was just getting more frustrated. I was getting more phone calls from families that I knew, families that I'd known my whole entire career, and families I didn't know, where their child was either being accused or being abused or at risk of either one of those things. And I just get frustrated talking about a problem. I'm not the kind of person, and I never will be, I don't think, to sit around and talk about a problem, admire a problem, and sit in my hands and say, what can we do?
Yeah.
And I at Best Point and at the Heights Center, I was so lucky to have the authority and the opportunity to create health and sex education programs for those students.
Yeah.
So I feel great about that, but I just want to make sure that there is a broader access to it. We have a lot of kids out there that are still not getting educated. I think right now that the statistic is about 80% of students with autism slash intellectual developmental disabilities get no access
Yeah.
to a
You're right.
developmentally appropriate health or sex education. Of the 20% that do get access, only 40%, I think, get access to a developmentally appropriate. So we
Hmm.
need we need to work on this. So that was one of the things. And then to your point, to ride on what you were talking about before, I also was really frustrated by, experiencing the wave of kids. We knew that there was going to be a wave of kids moving into high school and transition, and yet we're not doing anything to race ahead of them as they move into adulthood. And adult services are lacking for the people that are currently experiencing them, right? Much less this huge wave of individuals that are going to be dependent on them. And then what happens after adult services? What about aging services, right? Like we need to continue to work forward and anticipate the needs that we already know exist.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, your work's going to touch on so many different areas. Like, but one thing I think, and I want you to speak on, because I know it's a passion of yours, and I'm really interested, is the consent piece. because I definitely don't think that it's being taught in schools. I definitely don't think boys are getting, and why I would think my son would need more of that direct, being on the autism spectrum. Everything we've done for him has been such directly taught. And then for some reason, consent and, sex education is something they're just supposed to figure out somehow as they go through life. And
Right?
it's like, but everything else, I had to directly teach him how to use a spoon. I had to directly teach him how to chew food. I had to directly
Wow.
teach him how to talk with other people and converse. I mean, and we're doing all this work and then we miss this. And I know it's your one huge goal, one huge block is just that public education and the way that we run our public schools. There's just no way this is going to be part of the curriculum anytime soon in Ohio. um, but we're ready to just give this over always to like our intervention specialists. So like, oh, you've got this. Just add it to their plate, Oh, yeah, that's a problem. You think that might be an issue? Can you handle that? Can you put that in the IEP so you can deal with it? And it's like, no, this is something, sure, create a goal, do those things. If you have a great IS, sure. But this shouldn't just be that one person in your school buildings thing. So like,
Yeah.
can you talk about consent, and then I want to know whose responsibility is it? Is it the parents
Mm.
now, since we don't have this in school?
Mhm.
Who should be doing this? And if we can't do it as parents, where do we go? How do we do
Mm.
this?
That's really difficult. And I think, whose responsibility is it is a difficult question in the world of, school age services, because we know that a lot of our kids who have special learning needs don't automatically generalize skills outside of the school environment or outside of the classroom environment, right? So it's murky. And again, like a lot of what happens in the special world's need is so dependent on parents and caregivers, whether that's fair or not. It just is right now. And you can have the greatest school services in the Southwest Ohio region and still have a kid who doesn't generalize outside of those walls, right? And
Right,
that's not the school's fault. Um, necessarily. It's something that needs to be worked on in partnership. So like when we think about consent, one of the things, let's go back in time to a world in which we are teaching all kids with special needs compliance, right? Because one of the things that we noticed early on is that a lot of these kids were just refusing to do what they're supposed to do.
right,
um, and that's supposed to do, just so you know, the great majority of the time is really, really subjective and up to someone's opinion. And it's not actually fact-based. And that's really hard for a person, especially a person with autism, to accept. Like, don't make me do something because you think it's the right thing. Like, explain to me why this is the correct option to make, right? And that is even more difficult in the world of healthy relationships and social skills, right? Because we don't always do things because we want to. We do it because we want to get along with someone, we want someone to be our friend, or we want mommy to be happy with us, or there's so many different reasons why people do what they should do.
right,
Um, so consent, like we as special educators, as behavior therapists, as social workers, the field in itself is getting better at understanding this idea of consent and really starting to educate people not to focus on compliance programs. And so back in the day, if a kid didn't do what they were supposed to do, like back in the, classic programs, they would overcorrect and have the student do it multiple times, right? To demonstrate that they understood the expectation and they understood how to complete the task, and really, really difficult. But for the kid to follow those instructions, and a lot of times it was because they didn't want to. It's not because they didn't understand it, right?
right,
So we had a whole generation, I mean, generations of kids that were being taught to comply instead of use critical thinking. And critical thinking is where consent comes in, because consent is basically understanding, you understand what the question is, you understand what the expectation is, and then you make the decision whether or not you want to move forward with this, right? So it can be very difficult, especially when you include that social skills thing. So what I would say to families that are looking at, how do I teach my kid consent, and who aren't comfortable with being a health or sex educator, which is absolutely fine. There's a lot of ways to teach consent in non-sexual ways, and that's a really great start. So, and Jen, here's another thing that you don't know, and I'm going to introduce in this whole podcast is my my one of my foci as I move into being an independent consultant is creating more accessible, universally designed sex education and health education classes. And this is going to be a work in progress, right? And it's going to require some trial and error, but the focus of one of my classes is consent and the other one is online safety. So
Mhm.
those are the two things that in the past years as an independent consultant I've noticed are a huge area of needs.
Huge.
There's not a lot of services. Nobody's really talking about these or educating kids directly, right, in ways that they need to be taught. And so for me, like the focus of teaching consent is going to be how can we do this in a non-sexual way? How can we teach people what consent means and how to use it,
Yeah.
right? When ordering food, when ordering a pizza with a group of people, right? Don't just agree to getting the mushrooms on there if you're, allergic to mushrooms. Like you need to speak up and say, "Hey, I'm allergic to mushrooms," not just "I don't like mushrooms," right? So exploring how to talk about consent, experience contrived consensual situations that are non-sexual, then educating people how to apply that into areas that are related to relationships and sexual interaction. So that's kind of my idea right now.
Oh, I love it. You said so many good things there, Amanda. Uh, Compliance. Yes, preach. I hate compliance training. And I feel like we still do it, even though it's an old practice. It's so much easier to have a
It
child
is.
comply than to
And
actually
this is like
speak.
an old school way of parenting as well, right? Not old school. And I'm sure, there's so many different parenting styles out there, but I was raised in more of a compliance focused, you're wearing a coat because it's cold outside and you're going to do it or else, you're not having dessert or whatever. There was always some sort of consequence on the other side of not doing what somebody wanted me to do, right? So, and maybe the code isn't the greatest example, but I will tell you the Brussels sprouts is probably the one that I use the most often, right? Like I've heard of kids being in feeding programs, and I'm like, goodness gracious, if I was in a feeding program that involved Brussels sprouts, like I'd be in that feeding program for the rest of my life. It's not because I have a sensory issue, it's because I really don't like them?
Yeah.
And then not having language on top of that, I cannot imagine how frustrated I would be if someone was trying to get me to do something and eat something that was making me gag, like literally making me gag. It
Yeah.
wasn't because of, you know, I was just trying to be difficult. So it's something that's difficult to tease out when you're working with kids, especially when you're working with individuals that have little to no language and there are care and safety issues. Like, is this going to be a failure to thrive situation? So you really got to lean on your professionals and have a team, and if you don't have a team of professionals, have a team of, other parents and, people at your school that you can talk to through these situations and figure out like, is this something that we need to be pushing forward on, even though they're, refusing this because this is an issue of care and safety and welfare,
Yeah.
or is this an issue in which I really need to choose my battles and maybe I don't push a Brussels sprouts right now and I focus on just getting them to wear socks and shoes when it's cold outside,
Yeah.
you
100%.
know?
And I think it's really tough for parents. And I will say I'm like the number one parent to struggle with this because it is much easier to go the compliance route and to say, I just know this is the healthy way to do this. This is how I was taught. This is how, if you just can get through this, I know you can just continue to eat the way I do, and then you'll feel better rather than following his journey and listening to his self advocacy that I've taught him to do, that I think is so
Right.
important, and to respect him as an equal human being to me, even at a really young age, which I think people on the spectrum, and I know this might sound like a big cliched statement, but I just think I have learned so much about respect and um,
Mhm.
myself and how
Mhm.
I can listen and observe and sit back and actually like learn how to be an expert rather than thinking I'm an expert right away and directing everybody around me by living with Jack and by working with individuals who have autism because he won't be easily directed. And he won't be, he has really
He has
great,
opinions.
yes, he has really great ideas and things that are just so different than the way that I've experienced my life. He experiences life so much differently, but it's not wrong. And
Mhm.
that's the thing. He's not experiencing it in the wrong way. And I think that's the difference is if you actually like respect, advocacy of someone else and their individual like thoughts and opinions and the way they're going to go through their life and the way they're going to be an adult and go through their life, it starts really young and allowing them to direct themselves and actually like listen and observe. I tell so many parents, I can't tell you how many parents I say, just like stop everything you're doing and just observe for a while
Mhm.
because you're pushing against something that's just and it's not working. And when you hit a wall, that should tell you to just sit back and observe. And I think that's just huge. This
That is great advice. If you have somebody who just keeps pushing back, there's typically a reason, right?
yeah. Yeah.
Behavior is communication. So whether that behavior be verbal or not verbal, behavior is communication. With someone who's logic driven, and we can use labels like autism, or you can say like there's more people out there that are logic driven than just people with autism, right? So let's think about someone, and I'm one of those people, right? So like I want the facts. I don't want to do something because you want me to do something. I want you to do something because it makes factual sense to do that, right? So I'm not someone who's going to go jumping off the cliff with all the rest of the dodos, right? Like I'm going to be the dodo who's like, why is everyone jumping off the cliff?
Right. Well, and then we
You
think
know,
that's a social, because for me, I always just wanted to be liked, I wanted to be part of the social. And I was like, I'm so social. I'm an extrovert. This is my thing. And he just must not care about what people think. And he needs to care about what people think. And then when I say I'm learning so much from him, like now that I'm in my 40s, like I'm trying really hard not to care what other people think and break that system
mhm.
down.
Oh my
And it's like
gosh.
he's been doing that from the beginning. And so how can we say that that's wrong? It's not. It's exactly like you're saying. It's logic driven. It's rational. It's like I'm glad he has that piece of him that can advocate for himself and say, I'm not doing that just because everybody else is doing it. But we're always trying to teach him how to be more social and to learn all these rules of
Provide
social.
a perspective. I think it's good. It's like, when I was a nonprofit administrator, right? Like I wanted to create a program because there was a need for the program and because I was seeing kids that were struggling out there with what was currently available. But I knew when I went to my executive leadership team, I couldn't just go with my feel good stuff. I couldn't just go, this is the right thing to do, guys. Doesn't it feel
Right.
great? I had to go with financials. I had to go with what made sense to them and what drove them ultimately was creating sustainable programs that would pay for themselves, right? So it's the same approach when you are talking to someone or trying to present information, like you can give them the full side of it. Like this is why it makes logical sense. And then this is the social ramifications of making that decision, right? Or however you want to word it. But when it goes back to compliant and consent and just using, how can we create the rationales to present to individuals? Like the shift that we've gone to is, some really black and white ones. So it's not okay versus not okay, right? We don't want to frame behavior as being okay or not okay because what's okay to Jen is very different than what's okay to Amanda, right? And people with autism, especially adults with autism, I love it, will shoot holes in that like immediately. They'll be like, is that you? Or is that like what the world says? Is this a public law? And that's one of the things that I learned in that support group that you're talking about. So we have shifted the focus. I think we're doing a better job of shifting the focus to talk about what's safe and what's unsafe and what's public and what's private, right? Those can be pretty black and white, safe and unsafe, especially, right? Um, in public versus private, and in both of these, really, like you have to put your lens as a family on this as well. And that's the other thing about sex education and health education is that, we can provide non-biased, black and white, scientifically sound information to individuals, and we will always rely on families to then put their cultural, religious, familial interpretation of, yes, that is true.
Right.
You become able to have children at this age, but in our family, we don't even date until this age. So blah blah, So and every family is going to have a different interpretation of that.
Yeah.
And that rolls into consent as well. And can be really difficult for a young adult if they're being told that something is not okay. Like you're not allowed to date, that's not okay. And I've heard this so many times from individuals, and then they see their peers dating.
Yeah.
Um, so I'll tell you an example. You know, Dr. TJ and I were teaching a class to young adults with Down syndrome, and we had broken the groups up into guys, young adult men, 18 plus, I think, and young adult women. And when we taught the girls' class, there was a young lady, not even from Ohio, so I don't have to worry about revealing too much there, but she let us know, and this is a young woman with Down syndrome, let us know that she was not allowed to date because she had a disability. And we said, "Oh, where did you learn that from?" And she's like, My parents told me. But yet, throughout this session, this 1 hour session, she kept sharing with us all this really dangerous behavior that she was engaged in. So, giving people her number, meeting people online, sneaking out of the house, saying that she was at work, but she actually wasn't at work,
Yep.
things that were really, really, really scary. So, and then, when we were teaching the guys, in the class, and this kind of goes back to what you were talking about, the guys really didn't have a good handle on what was safe and not safe behavior at all. And they weren't given as much instruction, it seems, especially the older guys. And I think that we put a lot of time in our girls in
Yeah.
teaching them things because we don't want them to get pregnant.
Yep.
And that was our big takeaway. We were like, wow, those girls knew a lot more than those guys did about
Yeah.
what was okay and what was not okay. And meanwhile, we have a group of guys that are out there trying to hug every stranger they come in contact with. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is going to be a future, like a
Yeah.
problem in the future if this guy
Yeah.
keeps hugging everybody that he meets.
Yeah.
So,
I know. Well, how do you talk to families then? Like, because this has to be, whether we like it or not, parents are super involved. What, even though
mhm,
the this person's an adult and you're probably teaching them, you know, you know, you can be the consultant that teaches them things, but the parents are going to be really involved in this. So, like, how do you talk to parents and say, like that story you just told sounds exactly like, when I went to school and there were kids where the parents were like, you cannot date. And those are exactly the kids who were sneaking out of the house,
mhm.
who were like
Yeah,
really
doesn't
getting,
work.
no, it
You know,
doesn't work. It doesn't work. So, but how do you think these are the same parents who would like have trouble even with a typically developing kid talking about these things with? Or there's just this definite like disability, like, um, cultural stuff we haven't gotten past about this because everybody is going to want the same things. Like
it's so interesting
weird.
that you would think this, right? So, like, first of all, I directly started teaching the health and sex education classes in 2012 when I first came to the children's home. And I offered the families an after school version and a during school version, right? And I called the after school version the MTV version and the during school version the PBS version, right?
Love it.
Um, First of all, and we had a parent intro night, and almost all the parents came to that parent intro night. We did not have a single parent that very first year. This is a very first year, right? So this is kind of mind blowing because nobody was doing this, right? And I did not have a single parent that said, I don't want my kid to have access to that information. Not a single parent. And over the 12 years that I was at the children's home in Best Point, I never had a family that was like, absolutely not. I do not want my kid to have. I mean, I was really surprised. Yeah, I
Yeah,
was I was expecting there to be a lot more pushback. We would have families that would say, can my kid not be involved in that particular topic,
sure.
right? Because we would send out intro letters and a curriculum and things like that. we would have more kids say, I don't want it or I don't need it.
Right.
And even to this day, as someone who's been providing this education, the great majority of the pushback I've ever gotten is from the individual that I'm trying to provide the education to.
Got it. Yep. Yep.
It's not typically the parents, but to answer your question like a good interviewee, um,
Because my questions
knowledge is
are so
power.
great.
Knowledge is power.
Yeah.
And, if we do not provide this education to these individuals, they're going to figure it out in not safe ways.
Yeah.
So, the motivation that I would tell families is, like we're providing information in a pretty non-biased way. This is factual information. And then we encourage the families to take that information and build upon it. If their kids actually come home and talk to them about it, they don't. They usually don't. Um, but knowledge is power. And the great majority of the data out there shows that educating people around sex education actually increases abstinence, increases contraceptive use, and delays the first sexual experience. And I think that that information really provides comfort to a lot of families,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. It makes total sense.
So I use data because I am a lay scientist. And so that is my approach when I talk to families about this. And I say, what ends up happening if you don't get this education to your young adult, your child, your young adult, your older adult even, right? Um, they will figure out a way to get access to the information, and it might not be the most reliable source,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It might be from the internet. More than likely, it might be from a Reddit thread. It might be from a Discord group. It might be from pornography. And we know that those things are not accurate and they're not representative of what actually happens in healthy relationships a lot of times.
What I learned about, like, over the years of just reading parent kind of books and things was that I was supposed to just kind of make it part of like a daily thing and just layer it in. So it wasn't like what my parents did, like it is now time to sit down and let's have the talk and
Uh-huh.
let's watch a video and like it was and here's the book and like
Uh-huh.
everybody was like red faced and like I remember putting a pillow over my head when the movie was on and like I let's not do that. So
Hmm.
how do you layer it in without them and I'm talking
Catching
about
on.
this from experience, talking about it all the time. So like I hear
Uh-huh.
the word erection in my house a lot right now, like a lot,
Hmm.
because he thinks it's funny and because we're dealing with that and like other people are
Hmm.
dealing with that in his school and it's like a thing that's happening in the eighth grade. And
Yeah.
so I think a lot of parents are just like, oh my God, if we talk about it, then they're gonna want to talk about it all the time.
Hmm.
And it's like a something that's gonna keep going. There's not, I mean, we need to talk about it, right?
We do need to talk about it. I think there's ways to talk about physiology, anatomy in natural ways. There's way to redirect it as well to make sure that your kids know the settings that are it's okay. So instead of again, like we really want to make sure that we're not shaming kids when we're talking about health and sex education things. So
Right,
saying like that's not right.
right.
Instead, like if your son were to talk about an erection in Kroger, you could just quickly be like, listen, this is something we talk about at home,
That's right. Yep,
right? And it's just a positive redirection. You didn't say, don't talk about that, or we don't do that in Kroger. You just said, hey, that's something we talk about at home. And
right.
that's it, right? If that redirection doesn't have happen, I think, you just
When I think
use
a
your
lot of people would
skills.
be like, it came up at Kroger, and then you're like, never bring it up again. But what I would do is go home and
Hmm.
say, hey, remember when you told me that at Kroger? Do you want to talk about it
Hmm.
now? And I think that's hard,
Not
but
everybody would do that.
no,
Yes,
they
not
wouldn't do.
everybody would do that. You're
I
right.
think, yeah,
I think that it's more more an option these days to get some passive parenting resources. So like
yeah,
videos, websites, things like that. Like when you're uncomfortable, if you're more of a passive parent or just a low key personality, there are more resources out there than ever. The thing that I'm concerned about, when I think about all those resources again, when I go back to my service gap mentality, is what about the kids who don't have language? What about the kids who have significant learning challenge? What about the kids that are not conversational? And that, is where I will always say we need an in-person option, right? Like it cannot just be the internet. And even if the information is getting into their brains, right? So the way that I would structure classes, and I think other people do this as well, is that we would talk about private and public before we left the class. And again, and I'm telling you, we taught sex ed to kids with autism. And when I first started teaching, we had less than 20 kids in the school, right? And I was no longer the teacher in 2024, but by the time I left, we had 130 plus kids with autism and at the Height Center specifically, right? We did not have an issue with this on a regular basis. The great majority of the kids, they just knew that this was not something you talked about in the hallways. But guess what? Kids talk about this stuff in the hallways. They talk about it in the lunchroom. Here is what the difference is. If typical kids talk about it, when I walk up to their table, right, they stop talking about it. That's the difference. All right. Whereas when I walk up to a lunch table at the Height Center, they continue talking about it and I have to be like, shh, shh, this is when you stop talking about that. The adult is now here. We have to adapt to the context. This is when you stop telling dirty jokes, dirty jokes about, girls' body parts or boys' body parts, right? That's the difference. A lot of times with what we're viewing and what we're experiencing with sexuality and people with special needs is that it's without the filter, without the social filter a lot of times, or without, knowing that they should, start whispering when mom walks by versus, continuing to have, or even including mom in the conversation, right? That's another thing that has happened in the past. You're like, this should not be a part of this joke. This is your joke. Like, mom, wait until I leave to tell this joke. So a lot of the kids um, are getting access to this education when they're in school. They're getting access to the information. It's our opportunity as adults and parents to shape that information. So you can talk about body parts from the age of, from birth, basically, right? And we can start introducing those in scientific terms. And there'll be a whole entire group of people out there that say that we can only talk about body parts in scientific terms, but we are doing individuals who have special learning needs a great disservice if we do not teach them the slang, because unfortunately, the slang can be used against us if you don't know what it means, right? So somebody can refer to you as a word, and if you don't know what that word means, then you don't know that you should be mad about it, right? Um, Physiology and anatomy is a pretty easy way to start to just start mixing up the scientific terms with, do you know that's also called a hard on, honey, when he brings up an erection and like, and just adding, and you have a sense of humor, and yes, you would blush, but like, and maybe you get your husband to have those conversations, but just like naturally, like adding to that conversation and teaching, using it as a teaching opportunity is good. I think categories of relationships is something, again, that we can teach from a very, very young age. And this is something related to consent. So, really starting to talk about who a stranger is versus an acquaintance versus a community helper, which thankfully in the last couple years, we started distinguishing community helper from stranger because that was an issue, versus, close family and friends, best friends, things like that. So like coming up with those categories, and maybe they're categories you get from a book, or maybe they're categories that you create for your family, but um, that's really important. Types of touch. So like the types of touch in your family, like, hey, we're a bunch of huggers, but just so you know, that family is not a bunch of huggers. So like we do not hug them and they actually like fist bumps, and it's best to really ask people what kind of touch they want before you just go full in. So just teaching those things in natural ways, and I think in non-sexual ways again. So like a fist bump, we're not talking about physiology and anatomy when we're talking about fist bumps, right? It doesn't have to be embarrassing. Safe, not safe, public versus private. These are all conversations that we can have that shape, right, the kid's attitude and how they interact with the world, and will ultimately shape how they interact sexually as well, right? Beautiful. And in healthy relationships. So, how do we teach those really important things from the time we're able to? from a very early age. And sometimes that, and this is probably the part that makes people all the most uncomfortable, is involving the people around us, right? Whether that be family,
Yeah.
friends, sometimes strangers. Like, hey, listen, I'm really trying to get my kid to understand that it's not appropriate to touch strangers, and you just touched me. Like
Right.
things like that. Or like hugging people that you don't know. That's something that we really need
Oh, that one's a hard
to
one.
check it.
My daughter with Down syndrome, like everybody wants an Evie hug, and it's like this thing.
Hmm.
She gives the best hug. She's so sweet. And now what we've done, all of us,
Hmm.
is create this like welcome, like non-consensual. She's hugging everybody without consent. People are hugging her without consent. It's all
Right.
happening. Yes. Yeah.
Hey, you can't beat yourself up for that because the world needs more love, right? We know that.
Right.
And like there is a special kind of love that comes from an individual with Down syndrome, especially when you get an Evie hug, right? Like
Oh
it's
my
just a
God.
special feeling. And it can really it can break up a tense moment. There's so many benefits to it, but at some point you're wanting to shape around that. Sometimes it's okay if you don't want to hug, right?
Yeah.
And sometimes it's okay for you not to feel like you have to hug someone. Like don't push through your sad feelings because it's expected that you give a hug. And that's something, again, back to consent, right? Like she
Yeah.
might be having a bad day and she's giving hugs because that's what she does instead of that's what she feels like doing, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that translates when we get older. And so, like I've talked about consent with college kids. I will never forget the first time I did this. And it was a large group of pre-service teachers, and I was talking to them about consent. And I said, that you can agree to go on a date with someone and that it can be going really well and you're getting, super physical and you're really enjoying yourself. And then you can decide not to follow through with having sex. Do you know that you can say, I changed my mind? And some of the facial expressions of the audience made me realize that they did not know that they could change their mind, that there's an obligation to follow through with the sexual promise that you made an hour, a day, a week ago, and you don't have to do that, right? So if typical people are struggling with this, you can pretty much bet your bootstraps that people with special needs and individual learning needs are struggling with this, right?
100%.
So, and it's the same thing for people that are married, like there's this idea of, like you're supposed to, like, well, Valentine's Day is coming up, ladies, so, just strap in. And that's not the case. It's just not the case. Um, and the thing that, needs to happen, I guess, around that and can be really uncomfortable with people is, again, that conversation, like actually having a conversation about, what you're good with and what you're not good with. And consent, like, there's all sorts of wonderful tools out there. The one that I like, and that I probably use the most is a acronym called FRIES. Have you ever heard of the FRIES acronym?
Nope.
All right, so FRIES, FRIES, consent is freely given, it's reversible, it's informed, and it's enthusiastic and specific, right? So basically, it's saying that you know what you're getting into and you're looking forward to it. That's really what it means, right? So, like, if I tell someone I'm going out on a date with them on Friday, and I'm thinking, all right, well, we're going to go on a date, and at the very most, like we might have a kiss, a hug or a kiss at the end of this date, right? And then that person goes into the date thinking like we are going to have sex at the end of this date. Like right there, we do not have reciprocity on what, the specific thing that's happening. So having that conversation, or, a lot of people just rely on the nonverbals, right? Like that's what we rely on right now is that nonverbal language and those the gray area
Mm.
that communicates that I'm not interested in what people with autism and other diagnoses just really, really, really struggle with, right?
Yes.
So, and that is what makes consent really dicey is when you have someone who's relying on nonverbals and you have another person who cannot read those nonverbals. Because if there's one thing that I've known as a girl, and as a pretty logic driven girl, like my most of my life, like I remember looking back in the flirting and the game playing that the girls would do, and I was a part of these girl groups, and they'd be like, well, I'm gonna do this, but I don't really mean that. I'm gonna say
Right.
this, and I'm not gonna, and I'd be like, that's not fair.
Right.
You
Right.
know, like that is not fair. So we're playing by a bunch, we're playing the same game, and everybody's got different rule books, and that is really difficult. And that's why, talking about consent and making things are consensual, make sure that we're all playing out of the same rule book,
Yeah.
right?
Well, yeah, and I mean, like you said, we're doing this for girls better probably than we are for boys, and I think you're right. And I think it's because we just assume the girls are going to be like the target of the like
Hmm.
this kind of bad stuff
Hmm.
and the boys aren't, but that's not true. Like most
Not
people
true.
with disabilities are the ones that are vulnerable to the abuse, not the abuser. Not that it can't happen and that, you know, that we're
Right.
dealing with that and that I, worry about that too, just worrying about, I mean, I just worry about our guys, like you said, like just not knowing like when Jack has crushes on girls in his class, like, and those
Hmm.
girls are typically developing girls just running around, and I'm just like, how's that all gonna go? Like I
Right.
worry about that as a parent. I think a lot of parents do. And so like a lot of parents just go like, it's not gonna happen for you. Like you are asexual. You are not gonna be
Hmm.
this person. So just and it's a bonus or something maybe at the end that they're thinking if they do get married, great. If they find somebody, but for right now, like it's just better for all of our hearts if you just believe that you just don't have that or something.
Hmm.
I don't know.
Right.
There's
And
some of
that's
that.
not really how it works. Yeah. And I mean,
No.
if anything, it just adds to, a lot of the people that I've worked with over the years, the unfortunate feeling that they have is that there's something wrong with them, right?
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
ones that are self-aware enough that, are starting to compare themselves to their peers, you're just adding something to that list, and you're adding something that feels like it has a lot of value when you're in high school,
Yes.
right? Those social slash sexual relationships, the ability to flirt, the ability to attract someone, the ability to be attractive to someone. These are all things that we want. And we kind of innately, like, I don't know, I don't remember like at some point like being like, okay, this is a time when I'm going to start being attracted to, other people, and I want them to be attracted to me. It happens very naturally. Why do we not expect the same for people with special learning needs,
Yes.
right? Like
Yes.
they're going to have the same thing. They want to be loved, they want to be accepted, they want to experience love, and they should deserve it. That's the thing.
Yes.
They do deserve it, and they should experience it. So, going back to the why, the scary why is that, yeah, the scary why of why to teach this is that people with, diagnoses typically are, experiencing abuse at least 7, if not 8 times higher than a typical person. All right. Um, and then that's just a reported stuff.
That's right.
That's another scary thing. So they're also at a higher risk of being accused
Yeah.
again. And the shift changes. I'm telling you, when you go from school age to adult, so that's another thing that you can start thinking about, Jen, and I'll blow your mind with that is like when you turn 18,
That's right.
things change, right?
That's when you talk
So
about criminal justice.
and sometimes, yeah, and sometimes the criminal justice things, like it comes from it blows up quickly out of seemingly innocuous stuff, right? So if you have a kid that's interested, and I'm probably gonna freak some families out there, but who's interested in anime or manga, if you look at the girl characters in anime and manga, they're typically made to look like school age, but with like, I
Hmm.
don't know, like gigantic female features.
Hmm. Right.
Female anatomy anatomical features, right? So, and that's all well and great when you're 16 and watching these animes, but when you're 25 and you're watching animes that have, 12-year-old characters with double Z boobs, like we're getting into legal territory there.
Yeah.
Who tells anyone that?
Right.
Who
Yeah.
teaches individuals that? Does a
Well,
pop-up come on their screen that says if you're over 18, this could actually get you in trouble at this point? You know
yeah.
what I mean? Like that doesn't happen, and those shows are still available on the TV. You can look them up on Netflix in a second, right? So, it's just really difficult for an individual who has autism, who has, any sort of intellectual disability to also understand why it was okay at 17 years old, and then we have this birthday and suddenly it's not okay either,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So
So,
confusing. And
mhm.
just aren't there like talking about it as much as we should. Because I didn't even think about that. That is a mind blower. I knew you were gonna
Yeah,
blow
and
my mind with this conversation.
and again, none of this is to be, I don't want to be a doomsdayer when it comes to it, but I do want to be a champion of, we really need to get this education to our kids. Because here's the thing. So Ohio is the very last at this point, the very last to adopt any sort of health education content standards, right? And they have some that they've come up with, like, well, we definitely want to teach them about this. We definitely want to teach them about that. But there is not a comprehensive health education being made available. And it's not being, monitored. And it's not based on any sort of best practices. Like
That's
there's, so that's even worse, right? So, and then when you think about health, the quality comprehensive sex education, health education, right? Um, Health educators are not special educators, and special educators are not health educators,
that's right.
right? So that is challenging. And so we have to be aware of that expectation as parents, as professionals, when we're approaching this with the schools, because yeah, it's not fair that our kids aren't getting access to this right now, but we don't even have the appropriate, like there's only a very few people that have the appropriate certification to teach people with special needs when it comes down to it. And I'm going to tell you something, Jen, I'm not one of them. I am not ASECT certified. I've been someone who's been talking about this and, teaching this, for years and years and years, but I don't have the, specialized certification and not a lot of people do, right? So
I don't think
we
any
really
more
need to
districts
address
around
that.
here have
Hmm.
that, I can't think of one that's doing it that I know that's doing a great
Hmm.
job. And I, like you said, I'm not going to make my 32-year-old special education teacher who got into this because she had a sister with Down syndrome and loves teaching kids, like, and now teaches seventh and eighth grade. And I'm going to be like, hey, by the
Right.
way, this is coming up. Can you
Well,
take this on? Like, holy
right.
moly, this is not what she signed up for. And it's not what I signed up for either, but we all have to take some responsibility here. And I think you need to tell us how we can find you and how people can get a hold of you and where you can
Sure.
come and how can we get some of this special sauce because we need it around here in Southwest Ohio for sure. Because you're right. The state of Ohio, I mean, as much as I would love this in our schools, I just think it's a long
Hmm.
time coming. So
I agree with you, and it still won't meet the needs of everybody, right? And it would be, I mean, and it certainly isn't going to meet the needs of anybody who's currently in school because it would be a process to get quality services in place. And like we said, the special education, that still there's a lot of variability across the state of Ohio, right? With the quality of services and the types of services and things like that. So my name is Amanda Tipkemper, and my website is Amanda Tipkemper LLC. And I'm on Facebook as well. I have a LinkedIn account. My last name is T as in Tom, I, P as in Paul, K, E, M as in Mary, P as in Paul, E, R. So it's phonetic, Tipkemper. And then, of course, Jen knows how to get a hold of me. So if anybody really wants to get a hold of me, I'm an independent contractor. So I'm working with families, I'm working with organizations. Like I shared with you, Jen, I'm working on two particular classes right now, online safety and consent. And then the next step for that is going to be to find locations. I really feel strongly that we need in-person options for some
yeah,
people, just
please.
like some of us love Zoom and love in person. The same goes for people who have special learning needs, right? So we need to have that full continuum. For families who want to check it out, there's a couple of options that I love. So amaze.org um, is a great option. 2 to 3 minute videos, all about anything sexuality, basically. Fantastic videos. So if you have a kid who, prefers videos, doesn't want you to talk to them about it, is someone that you want to make sure gets exposure to this, but you're not really sure what is all sinking in, it's a great resource for kids of all types. And you can put it on the computer, on the TV, you can put it on the iPad. Another local resource right now is Project Care and STAR classes. Those are through Planned Parenthood and the YWCA. Again, these they do have some in-person options. and they have virtual options as well. It is going to meet the needs of some people, not all people. All right.
Yep.
And then I am going to be looking for um, people to host my class, and I am an independent consultant, and I'm trying to figure out how to make these as affordable as possible. There will be a fee though, for the class, and all that information is still in process. I'm hoping to have that ready by March of 2025 though. Really,
Yeah.
it's been too late and too long coming as far as I feel, when it comes to providing this, and I'm excited to get started.
Amanda, thank you so much for coming on and talking to me. I could talk to you all day. Um, I will definitely put all that information you just gave me in the show notes. And then, of course, yes,
Great.
anybody can call the ARC and I'll just refer you. I already do this anyway. If anybody ever calls me about these things or basically anything having to do with, adult education in our area, I think it's just so
Mhm.
important. So thank you. And I'll be calling you about my own kids all the time.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Jen. Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Amanda. All right.